Good evening, everybody, and welcome to the first episode of the T2T Dynasty Live. We're going to be talking all things Dynasty every week. Wednesdays at 6 p.m. will be kind of where we are slotted in, but that may change from time to time just based on our real life schedules.
6 p.m.
6
Pacific
p.m.
time.
Pacific time. Yeah, Pacific time. So that's 9 p.m. for you East Coast people. My name is Dylan Carlson. Most of you know me as Wicked. You can find me on Twitter at Wicked_Dynasty or in the Gilded Chat as Wicked. I'm the Chief Content Coordinator for T2T and a fantasy football addict, just like most of you watching. Over here to my left is Mike. You can find him on Twitter at DynastyDogMike. And then down below we got AJ at AJ_FF Ball. How you guys doing today?
Solid.
great.
By yourself. Yeah.
You guys excited for the new show we got going here?
Very
Yeah.
excited.
Yeah, very excited. And I'm excited that the schedule release just happened.
Yeah.
Hour.
They really have over the years started to slow drip that to us, and it's kind of annoying.
Mm-hmm. Especially with how good these social media teams or these teams make these releases. Like the Chargers one is always so good.
Yeah. So Mike, I'll start with you. What matchup are you most looking forward to?
So it's pretty hard to just pass up the Colts and Texans week 1, but I'll skip that one. So I will go with a kind of an oddball pick, but the Patriots and the Bears week 10. I think we'll see Drake May at that point, if not to even start the season. And I think Caleb versus Drake May is just going to be fun television.
Right on. Yeah, I'd be surprised if Drake doesn't start week 1. I think that the Jacoby Brissett going to be the starter, and New England stuff is going to die out by the end of training camp.
Yeah, I would think so too. But he's just a constant professional. I can't talk in Jacoby Brissett. So I mean, it wouldn't surprise me if they give him a few weeks going, but we'll see. I've heard some decent things about Drake May and their rookie OTAs, some not so great. So we'll see.
Yeah. What about you, AJ? Which matchup are you looking forward to the most?
Well, my eyes gravitated towards the Week 17 slate because for anybody out there who plays best ball and does those early best ball underdog drafts, Week 17 is kind of the big thing. That's when you're if you can make it all the way through, that's when you get the chance at winning big money and like the best ball mania and those things. So the Baltimore Houston matchup week 17, which is that's actually Christmas. So yeah, that Christmas game stuck out as I think all the Ravens and Texans players will start to be even more popular in those underdog drafts because of that particular matchup.
That's going to be on Netflix too, if I'm not mistaken.
Yeah, which is weird, and I don't know how I feel about that, but
I don't like it.
They're killing us with the games on the various streaming services. Like you got to have 3 different streaming services plus the YouTube Sunday night or Sunday ticket to be able to watch all the games. It's gotten way too spread out and way too complicated. I don't like having to have all of these things just to watch some football.
Mm-hmm. It's annoying. It's a money grab.
Yeah. But for me, I'm going to be a homer, and I'm really looking forward to the I believe it's week 7 game, Cowboys versus 49ers. I think that's going to be a really good measuring stick game to see if this Cowboys squad is going to be any different than the past 15. Because by week 7, 8, around mid-season, teams are kind of at full force. You see a lot of teams kind of start slow as players come off conditioning, getting used to playing the NFL game week after week again. Sometimes we get some sloppy football to start the year. Mid-season, everybody should be in peak form, not too tired yet from the long season. So I'm really looking forward to seeing if Dallas can be competitive against what's probably going to be a pretty dominant 49ers group again.
It's always, especially throughout history, that the Cowboys usually choke in December.
Yep, that is true.
I love it every year.
They break my heart every year, so I'm used to it. Before we get started with our dynasty talk, there's a couple of leagues that we're filling over at T2T that I want to plug here. Right now, I'm working on filling a 384 team redraft tournament. It's going to be a $15 buy-in with a $4,000 first prize. So those are pretty good. Somebody's going to be very happy with that ratio there. The way it's broken down is there's going to be 32 leagues, 12 teams per league. Weeks 1 through 12 is going to be the regular season, and the highest scoring team from each league is going to compete weeks 13 through 17 in a single elimination tournament until there's only one man left standing or woman left standing for that $4,000 prize. We also have a couple of dynasty leagues that we're filling. These are startups, 12 teamers, Superflex, TEP, PPR. One of them's a $100 buy-in. One of them is free. So if you want to get in on those, reach out to me or hop into the Gilded and send me a message and I can get you guys linked up. And then Justin is trying to fill a charity league, I know, as well. I don't have all the details on that. So if you're interested in playing some fantasy football for a good cause, make sure that you hit up Justin because I know he's searching for some people. And with that, we are just going to take a real quick break to tell you guys about our Patreon.
For those that aren't already aware, Rival Fantasy is the newest evolution in fantasy sports. Rival's all-in-one fantasy platform has changed the fantasy sports landscape. From fantasy bingo, where you mark off boxes of achievements that your players accomplish on the field, to season-long and best ball leagues, to mock drafts and challenges, and more. They have the perfect user-friendly website and app for you. So send a challenge to your friend or send a challenge to your rival and tell them to put their money where their mouth is. But your first deposit of up to $200 will be matched, plus an additional $25 just for using that link, joinrival.com/titletribe. That's joinrival.com/titletribe.
Well, I was going to talk about the Patreon, but we'll do that later because I hit the wrong button. So this Dynasty show is going to vary on content from week to week, just, kind of based on how we're feeling any given time. Sometimes we'll talk about rankings, we'll talk buys, sells, roster construction, trade evaluation, stuff like that. But for this first episode, I thought it would be really nice to do just a very basic Dynasty 101 for all the people that are maybe new to Dynasty. I know this time of year, a lot of redraft guys start itching. And they want to check out a dynasty league. It can be a little intimidating for some people because it is a very different strategy that you need to employ for the most part. And so we're just going to go over some basics here so that you new players or you beginners and even some veterans could probably take some lessons from this. But we want to, that's great, baby. But we want to make sure that you guys are set up for success and you feel comfortable joining that first dynasty startup. So the first thing I want to go over here, guys, is the big differences between redraft and dynasty leagues, because that can be a big hurdle for somebody that's never done a dynasty league before, just the different ways that you need to approach this as opposed to a redraft. So, Mike, what are some key things that you think that everybody should know about joining their first dynasty league if all they have is redraft experience?
So I would be prepared to struggle your first year. That's kind of how it happens, I think, to a lot of us, me included. Don't go overboard with young players, I would say, for sure, because that was something that really made me think I should do, but I shouldn't have done it. I should have had a better balance. And to be honest, I really treated it, as I started to get a little bit more comfortable, as playing Madden franchise mode. And that's the best way I describe it to people. Trading players, swapping players, just be prepared for anything. And, don't just draft a guy because you like them. Draft them that you think that they're going to be on your team for the next 3 to 5 year window. Yeah.
What about you, AJ? What do you got to say about that redraft versus dynasty approach?
Yeah, I like what you said, Mike, about the not to emphasize age, like how it's obviously really important, but you don't just want to prop people up too much because they're young. And I think a lot of people tend to assume that younger players will just automatically get better, and if somebody has like a pretty good rookie year, or like then they're just going to get better, and that's not obviously exactly how it goes all the time. As an example, a guy like Damian Pierce had a good rookie year, and now he's completely worthless in Dynasty. And beyond that, I think the team situation is a lot less important in Dynasty than it is in redraft. It still matters, of course, because even though it's Dynasty, you're still playing a fantasy league every year. Like, you're still trying to win that year, but you're willing to get players who you just think are talented, even if they're in a bad situation, because situations change way quicker than you would think. Like Aaron Rodgers going to the Jets, and didn't work out so well, but Russell Wilson going to the Broncos was like a big thing that changed the dynasty landscape. So don't overemphasize situation either.
Yeah, so age and situation are two of the big ones. You're going to value younger players a little bit more than you would typically in a redraft format. Pretty much any player of mid-level talent and above gets a little boost if they're younger. Obviously, you don't want to go too far overboard with that. But when you're looking at some of these trades, maybe you've seen some dynasty trades on Twitter, and it's like, I don't understand where the value for that is coming from. Well, it's probably because one of them is 22 and they're trading away vets that are 30, 31 and on their way out. So age factors into a lot of the decisions you're going to make as a dynasty manager, more so than it does in a redraft format, because in redraft, you only care about 1 year. You don't need them to perform for the next 3 or 4. And then with situation, like you said, situations change so quickly. So maybe like a Drake May, I think, is a good example. He's going to be probably pretty low on people's redraft boards, just because in 2024, things don't look great. He doesn't have a great team. He doesn't have a lot of weapons, but he's still going to be pretty coveted in a dynasty league, especially in Superflex, because he's young, he's a 3rd overall pick, and you're planning on having him on your roster for 7 or 8 or 9 years. If he's got a slow rookie season, that's fine, because you're going to benefit later on down the road. So just taking a more forward-thinking approach to your roster construction, making sure you're planning ahead and not just looking at this season, is really important. And then the other thing that I want to touch on is that more so in Dynasty than in any other format, you need to be really paying attention to rookie classes. Like, I'm as somebody that primarily does dynasty leagues, I'm already looking at 2025 draft class. Like, who is going to be the guys that could potentially declare for the draft next season? And I'll evaluate, like, last off season, I was looking at the 2024 or this draft class that we just had. And I loved it. I thought it was going to be a great class. I thought there were going to be a ton of guys in there that I wanted. And I wasn't a fan of the previous year class. So what I did was I traded a lot of my rookie picks last year for rookie picks this year. And because I liked this rookie class a lot better, and it set me up to where I was able to take a ton of guys that I really loved this year, that I love more than the guys I would have gotten last year at my rookie slots. So just looking ahead at, what rookies are going to be coming out, or what draft classes are strong at receiver, which classes are strong at running back. I mean, you don't need to know every name, but if you can at least just get an idea of the overall projected strength of a draft class or a position group in that draft class, that's really important to being successful in Dynasty.
Yeah, and then you'll end up falling in the hole like I did and going into Devy leagues now as well.
Yeah. Well, that's the next step, right?
Yeah.
All right, guys. So I just want to take a quick minute here and tell you about our Gilded server. It is a free server where we just hang out and talk ball. and it's a great resource for you guys, especially if you're new in Dynasty, because there's tons of people in there that can help you out. Looking for a place to connect with fellow fantasy football fanatics? Well, look no further than our Gilded server. Join the Title Tribe, where you can chat, strategize, and debate about all things football. Whether you're swapping lineup advice, discussing the latest trades, or fearlessly defending your favorite player, our Gilded server is the perfect spot to hang out with like-minded fans. Our Gilded server is free to join, and the link can be found in the video description or on our website at toiletstotitles.com. We look forward to seeing you in the tribe.
That was a really quick wardrobe change you had there.
I'm fast, man. You gotta get on my level. All right, so the first thing that you're gonna do when you join a new Dynasty League is a startup draft. And this startup draft.
Can I say one thing about that?
Yeah.
The only thing that is different for some cases. So my first Dynasty League I was an expansion team.
Okay.
So instead of being in a startup draft, I had to essentially pick off other players. So we had a draft. It was
a dispersal draft.
Yeah, exactly. So that it's a little bit different, but it's just not everything is a startup. But
so
the startup is the main thing.
Yeah, personally for me, my recommendation to a new Dynasty player would be to join a fresh league, where you can participate in a startup draft. You can claim an orphan. And sometimes you're stuck with that orphan's roster and their draft picks. And sometimes if a Dynasty League has multiple orphans, they'll do what's called a dispersal draft, where they take all the players from those orphans and they put them into a player pool. And the 2 or 3 or 4 teams, however many it is, that get taken over by a different manager, will then do a little mini draft of those players to kind of reset their rosters. That can be fine, but my recommendation would be for a new player to join a fresh league, get a fresh start, and be able to take control of their team from day one. Because sometimes, and in many cases, an orphan is an orphan because it's just not a very good team. Most people don't orphan their teams because they're awesome and winning every year. So I would say start with a fresh group if you can. That would probably be the easiest transition from a redraft format into a Dynasty League. And if that's the case, if you're starting fresh with a brand new league, the first thing that you're going to do is a startup draft. And you're used to drafting and redraft, so you know how it works. But the evaluation of players and the way that people are going to get pulled off the board is going to be a lot different. And the other thing that you need to consider, and that does not really happen in redraft for the most part, I know some leagues do, but most do not, you're going to have a lot of trades that happen during the initial draft. So not everybody's going to be sitting and picking in their slot the way most redrafts go. There's going to be a lot of people moving around. And so we want to cover a few different strategies that you can use and implement in your startup drafts so that you can be successful. Now, it's important in a Dynasty draft to be flexible and kind of fluid as things change. As people get picked off the board, you need to pay attention to other people's rosters to kind of see and predict if you think somebody's going to slide, or, if it's a super flex league and the guy picking after you doesn't have any quarterbacks, you might want to just take your quarterback now if it's somebody you're eyeing. So you need to pay attention to that kind of stuff, and you need to be willing to pivot. But these initial strategies that I'm going to lay out here for you are solid ways to approach your first startup draft. And some of them, a couple of these strategies are very conservative and will be something that even if you're not super comfortable with trades and that kind of stuff yet, you can still have a successful startup draft. So the first one that I'd like to jump in here is my favorite startup draft strategy, and probably the one that I would recommend the least to a new Dynasty manager, and that is the aggressive draft strategy. This strategy is looking to be very competitive year 1, year 2. You're basically trying to go all in from the jump. They tend to care less about age. You approach this draft kind of similar to a redraft, Whereas the age of a player doesn't matter so much because you're trying to win in the next year or two, not in year 4 or 5. So the value depreciation that you'll get on a guy like, I don't know, Amari Cooper, who's about to hit 30, not so much if you're being aggressive and trying to win this year, because we can probably expect Amari Cooper to have a pretty good season now. He just might not be useful for much longer. Another thing that is kind of key to this strategy is you don't really care so much about your rookie picks. You will frequently be looking to trade your rookie picks to get more top 100, top 50 players. So like if I'm doing this, I'm taking an elite guy in the first round, and I'm immediately trying to trade my rookie first for another first or second rounder, and I'm trying to get back up there as high as I can. I don't care about the 2025 rookie class. I care about getting back in the top 3 rounds and getting an extra pick and getting an extra, top 30 guy on my roster.
One thing I'll add to that is I think if that's your strategy, I think the way that I like to approach that kind of strategy is to do everything I can to get 2 top tier quarterbacks.
Yeah. Well, in the super flex. Yeah.
Right. Yeah. I think at this point,
I think that's more the standard these days,
yeah,
for dynasty leagues anyway.
Exactly. Yeah. And that's probably another thing if you're switching or if you're joining dynasty leagues for the first time, they're almost always super flex, which is maybe something you haven't played before. But assuming it's a super flex, getting 2 top tier quarterbacks just makes your life so much easier, because generally speaking, a startup draft is the cheapest quarterbacks ever are. Yeah. Like, it's just so hard to trade for them because there's a limited number of starters.
And they're going to fly too. Yeah,
you're
going to see it's going to happen quick.
You'll see 16 quarterbacks go in the first 3.5 rounds. And by the time people stop picking quarterbacks, it's because you're in the Geno Smith territory. So it's pretty important to get yourself at least one anchor quarterback. And the big key to this strategy is you have to stay aggressive the whole time. If you start the draft aggressive and then you kind of take your foot off the gas in the middle rounds, you're going to end up with huge holes in your roster. And so you can't start aggressive and then change your mind halfway through the draft and be like, you know what, I kind of want to get some of these rookie picks back, or I should have gone younger. You have to fully commit to this strategy and see it all the way through to the end. So, Mike, what do you think about this strategy through the lens of a new player?
So I know it's cool to think about when you start dynasty, like, oh, I'm going to have this, rookie player for the rest of their career and all that stuff. Well, generally that doesn't happen. And the reason we join these leagues, believe it or not, is to win money and is to, win these leagues, be a champion. So the aggressive approach is kind of what I do. Not every case, but I've kind of split it down 50-50 in some of the leagues that I've done. But I kind of disagree with the 2 quarterback approach. Even in Superflex, the main, picks being quarterbacks. In a league, I drafted CeeDee Lamb and Jamar Chase at the 110 turn, 110, and then back down to the second I got Lamb. And then I ended up with Baker Mayfield and Jared Goff as my 2 quarterbacks later in the draft. So you don't have to necessarily just win based off stud quarterbacks, but it's good to have, especially in an aggressive strategy, to have an abundance of talent, especially at one position. Because if things don't go well, you could always sell off and start, during the season.
Yeah, you got to get multiple blue chip, top tier of their position players for this strategy to work, because you're sacrificing youth of your team. And so you need those elite guys to make sure that you win in the first year or two. Otherwise, your team is going to lose value very quickly, and it's going to stop performing well very quickly.
I've seen a bunch of instances where the player with the 101 trades it, gets like a third, a fifth, startup picks, multiple picks, whatever it is. And then that person now has, Josh Allen, and then they have the 1-8 and they end up with, Justin Herbert. So now they have 2 stud quarterbacks right off the bat. That's the aggressive approach, is basically selling off even those middle tier picks like the 4th, 5th round, which those are still great. There's still some, immense value. A lot of the rookies start to go around, the high chip rookies start to go in those rounds. But that's the aggressive approach, is when you really push all chips in.
Yeah, like last year I did this strategy in a pretty high stakes league, and so I wanted to win now because the buy-in was kind of expensive. I traded by the end of round 2 of the startup draft, 12-team league. I'd made 4 picks, and I had traded away my 4th, 5th, 6th, my rookie 1st and 2nd, and my 2025 rookie 1st. So I had depleted tons of draft picks, but I had 2 elite quarterbacks and 2 elite wide receivers, like top tier guys to carry my team. Now I didn't quite make it. So the strategy didn't work quite as planned, but I'm still going to be competitive this year. So we got another shot at it. But I mean, that's the risk you run, because you are pushing hard for the first year or two. And if your team comes up short, well, then you're basically in full rebuild mode, and it's going to be a minute before you're competitive again.
I think even if you are being aggressive, you still need to do what the draft board dictates. Like, don't just go and be like, I'm going to get 2 elite quarterbacks. Like, and if quarterbacks are flying, you reach on someone. Like, we're in the startup now, doing a startup right now, where I had the 109, and I was thinking about what quarterback I was going to take, and the first 8 picks are all quarterbacks. And I'm like, okay, I guess I'll just take.
You want the 9th best quarterback or the best receiver?
Right, exactly. Like, I will take Justin Jefferson with the 9th.
Right.
Thank you very much.
And so this kind of answers the question you were just mentioning: draft best player available or team needs. Especially for the aggressive strategy, the best player available is always the best way to go. Yeah. And to be honest, my strategy in general has always been draft best player available and trade for need down the line.
Yeah, I mean, you got to have a little bit of common sense. Like, if you got a running back and a receiver that are pretty closely ranked as far as you're concerned, and you've got 1 receiver and 4 running backs already on your roster, then take the receiver. But if there's a clear talent difference between 2 guys, and you need one and you don't really need the other, take the one that you don't really need, because he's going to be more valuable. Maybe you can trade him later on down the line, or who knows, injuries happen. Maybe you end up needing that guy by midseason. So if there's a big gap in projected points, then yeah, I would take the best player. If the guys are pretty close, you want to account for your needs.
Do you mind if I ask you one question about the aggressive strategy and the way you handle it? Do running backs mean more to you than they would in
Absolutely. I hate running backs. I don't love running backs. I hate drafting running backs. I'm in the startup with AJ, and I'm sick with myself because I took 2 elite running backs in the 2nd and 3rd at the turn. That's just not my style. But if you're going to be aggressive and you're going to be a win now team, you need to have good running backs. We'll talk about rebuilds later, and that's something that I'm going to touch on. Running backs are important if you're contending, and they're completely worthless if you're not. So I think that if you want to win now, then yes, you need to prioritize running back a little bit more than maybe I would recommend otherwise. I'd still rather have an elite receiver over an elite running back in pretty much any scenario, but you're going to need at least pretty good running backs if you're going to win a championship.
I would say for me, like, if I'm going for that win now approach, I don't know necessarily that I'm drafting running backs higher, but I'm probably drafting more of them in the first 12 rounds. I might take 3 or 4 in the between rounds 7 and 12, just kind of getting some of those guys who there might be uncertainty with them, but they have a chance to really pop.
Yeah. Well, and running backs get hurt a lot. So the last thing you want is to have this amazing roster that's definitely going to win, and then your running back gets hurt and you don't have anybody to slot in behind him. So running back is a place where you can, in an aggressive strategy, still achieve depth, because in the league today, there's just so many running backs that are useful. A lot of teams run at least 2 backs, and so there's less elite top end running backs, but there's more of that kind of middle of the pack running back class, and so that actually works into the advantage of this strategy. The second one I want to go over is pretty widely known as the productive struggle. You're not looking to win for the first couple of seasons. You kind of need to have that already in your mind when you go into the draft. If you're going to employ this strategy, you need to be okay with the fact that you're not winning a championship for a couple of seasons. This person likes to sell their premium startup picks for rookie draft picks. So like, I have the 110 instead of taking a CD Lamb. I trade back to the 205 and I pick up a second round rookie pick or a first round rookie pick. I'm really wanting to collect those rookies so that when the rookie draft comes along, I might not be very active at the beginning of the startup, but I've got 6 of the top 12 rookie picks, and that's how I'm going to build my team. So it's going to take me a little bit longer to be competitive, but my competitive window is going to end up being a lot bigger than some of these other strategies because you're building it through the top end elite rookies that are coming in every year in the draft. The key to success for this strategy is you have to be very patient with your roster building, and you have to be very on top of scouting rookie classes. This strategy 100% depends on you nailing your rookie drafts. And so if you're not somebody who is very good at that or doesn't have the time to really study the rookie classes as they're coming in, this isn't a strategy you're going to want to employ, because if this is going to be successful, you have to nail every one of these high draft picks that you're going to end up with. What do you think of this strategy, AJ?
I will say, I don't know if when I do that type of build, I don't know if I'm quite as aggressive in terms of trading for future picks, but in general, the productive struggle is definitely my favorite. I think it's the most fun and my favorite. The way that I kind of look at it more so is like, yes, I will always try and trade back, especially within a tier of players, to pick up, future picks here and there. But I'm just drafting all the high upside young players that I think are talented, and maybe they're lower because, people don't actually know how good they are yet because they haven't proven it, or because their situation hasn't been good. They haven't been able to produce because, it's called Dynasty Fantasy Football. I want to build a dynasty. I don't just want to win one year, even though financially it makes sense. You just win year one, your buy-in is good for a while. But I want to build a dynasty like Mike compared it to Madden franchise mode. Like when I play Madden franchise mode, I trade for all the draft picks I can because it's just drafting rookies is fun. It just is.
Yeah.
And I love college football. I like watching, like scouting players from college to the NFL. And at the end of the day, like for 99% of people, like fantasy football is still a hobby and it's just for fun. And like you should just draft in the way that, you're going to have the most fun. And for some people, that's being aggressive. For me, it's the productive struggle.
What do you think, Mike?
Yeah, so I kind of like the productive struggle too. I do believe it's fun, but I will say it's probably the more frustrating of the two because you're not getting the immediate payoff. You're not winning right away. Obviously, you're watching somebody else collect their winnings via league safe and stuff like that. But to be honest, I do it too. What you kind of mentioned it. So say for instance, at the 110, there's like 4 or 5 guys that I really, really like. I'll trade back, accrue some, draft capital, and then get another guy in that same tier that I had the person at 110 at. So I do enjoy that. But again, it is the most frustrating. And I think in the first and second year of the people that do this usually end up orphaning their team. So you got to be very careful.
Yeah, don't do that.
Yeah, exactly. Because I think people just are like, I'm going to nail this, and my team's not going to be great, but it's going to be fun, and I'm going to do this. And then the first year is not looking good. They're like, wow, I didn't do great, and they're out already, even though that's the way they drafted on purpose.
Yeah.
Another thing, is if you go for this kind of team and you go into your first season with multiple firsts for the following year, but once your season starts, you're winning games and you're maybe some of the young like rookies or second year players that you drafted are better than expected, and you drafted a couple backup running backs who now are the starter all of a sudden, and your team looks good. Don't be afraid to then use those future picks that you have and be aggressive now to then, expedite the process of being competitive right away. So I think staying fluid all the time is really important.
Yeah. I mean, I've seen lots of teams that loaded up on 2 years worth of rookie picks and they nailed every single one of them in their first year, and the team was just exploding with young talent. And then they used that second year's draft capital to gather some more upside guys and really push for a championship. So don't be afraid to pivot at any point. You need to always know kind of where your team is at and what its trajectory is, and be ready to either, fall back or push forward, just depending on how things are going for you. The third strategy I wanted to talk about here is what I like to call the depth strategy. This strategy works really well for larger leagues, so like 16-team leagues where depth is really important because the player pool is more spread out. This person in the startup draft is going to look to trade back frequently in the early portion to acquire startup capital. So whereas when I think of the productive struggle build, you want to collect rookie picks. When I think of this depth build, you want to be active in the startup. So you're taking a lot of guys in the startup draft, but you're doing it by trading back and picking up extra startup picks. So like in my previous example, instead of looking to grab a first round rookie pick to move out of the 110, I'd be looking at like, I'll move 110 to 205 and you give me your fourth. So, something like that. I want to accumulate extra assets, especially at the top end of the draft, because those are the picks that are the most valuable. So I'll get the best return on my trade back early in the draft. You won't get many elite top end guys. Like in this strategy, you're not getting a Justin Jefferson. You're not getting a Bijan Robinson because you're trading out of that slot where those guys are going to be available. But you're going to have amazing depth. You're going to have lots of that kind of middle to upper tier of player. And it allows you a ton of flexibility with your roster construction. You can withstand injuries very well. And you can play matchups. If you have guys that have good matchups from week to week, it allows you to make those decisions. And it's just a really good, safe floor dynasty roster construction that you can have. And the key to this is to take advantage of that safe floor. So when you get into the middle rounds of the draft, you've got a really good group of guys that give you a good foundation, and it allows you to be more aggressive with the upside plays in the middle rounds. You don't need these middle round guys to produce for you. You'll be okay if they don't. So you can take some more risks on guys that maybe haven't shown it yet, but man, if they figure it out, they're going to be great. Those are the types of picks you want to be making later on in the draft. What do you think, Mike?
So I like the depth approach as well. It's kind of one that could, after the startup is over, that could kind of go either way. You mentioned, playing the matchups, this and that. You can, if you're starting to play well and you have a lot of depth, you can trade that depth for more elite pieces. Or if you're going the opposite direction, trade that depth to a team that's competing and grab those picks. So you could basically, AJ said it earlier, staying fluid, and that's a great way to do it with the depth build. I do like that one a lot.
What do you think, AJ?
I think that you mentioned in bigger leagues, this is a good way to do that. And another thing that works kind of the same way as being in a bigger league is if you have bigger lineups. Like say your league is super flex, 2 running backs, 3 receivers, 3 flexes, like something, you're starting like 11 guys or whatever. There are going to be some teams who are starting some real bad players. And so if you trade back, like you'll see some scary stuff in at like flex number 3 sometimes.
Yeah.
So yeah, I think that that's also a really good situation to do this. And another thing with, how this and the productive struggle kind of tie together, because they are similar. If you're not trying to compete right away, don't worry about completing your lineup or anything. Like you don't necessarily even need two quarterbacks in a super. I mean, like ideally you would have that, but like if you're not going to compete right away and you know that, like just accumulate value, like accumulate players that you think will accrue value, and then you can sell them later for when you ultimately are competing. What the holes in your roster, you can fill those up.
Yeah, like I'm totally cool starting Roshan Johnson, who gets what carry a week in my starting lineup if I don't care about winning this year. I want the best player available in the startup draft, and then I'll plug whatever third string running back into that running back slot for the whole season because it's the only running back I have. And I'll end up with the 101. I'll have a bunch of other draft picks, and you can build your team that way. I really enjoy, if I'm going to take that approach, running back is usually where I skimp out because their shelf life is so short. And so I'll try to get some good players at other spots. And then I will literally start third and fourth string running backs because those are the only running backs I drafted. And I'm not going to win very many games because I don't have a starting running back. And that ultimately helps your strategy. So don't be afraid to leave a hole, just a massive glaring hole in your roster if you're taking this approach.
I will say though, the depth approach and having like the backup running backs is a good thing, especially if you're not starting out too hot. So say for instance, last year a team had Jonathan Taylor, a competing team, on their roster, and then you just so happen to draft Zach Moss.
Yeah.
And now you're
he's got value.
Yeah, exactly. So now you flip them and you get some extra stuff. So I do agree that the running backs lose value so easily, but they also gain value pretty quickly, especially when you have like the depth pieces at running back.
Absolutely. Yeah. I love
drafting backup running backs in that in general, but particularly in this kind of way.
Yeah. A good rule of thumb is that the big name running backs will do nothing but lose value, and then the backup running backs can do nothing but gain value. So if you're looking at your team as more of a long-term project, those backup running backs are going to be way more valuable to you than any starter could be. And then the last strategy I want to go through is what I call the conservative strategy. And I think this is a strategy that a good portion of redraft people coming into their first dynasty league will employ because it's very safe and it's kind of what they're used to. And it's something that they'll be very comfortable with as they, start to get their feet wet a little bit. So in this strategy, basically you're holding pretty tight to your draft slot. You might make some small trades up or down the draft board, but for the most part, you're going to be patient. You're going to sit and pick whatever guy you like when it's your turn. And the key to this is you need to make sure that these picks that you're making count. Because if you're not moving around a lot, if you're not trading for your guy, if you're not employing one of these other more direct strategies, you can end up with what I feel is the worst place to be in Dynasty, and that's an average team. If you're an average team in Dynasty, it means you're not competing for a championship and you're not competing for a good draft pick either. So being middle of the road in Dynasty is a really bad place to be. And that's where I see a lot of these conservative drafters go, is they end up with a pretty good roster that's just not quite good enough. And it actually becomes a detriment because they're not getting the high rookie capital that they kind of need to do something with their team. And then you get yourself in a situation where you have to figure out how to either make your team more competitive or start a rebuild. And so that can be kind of a tough spot for dynasty managers to get into. What do you think, Mike?
So I think the conservative, like you mentioned, is probably the safest for your first time. You're, just coming off a redraft, pretty much just drafting best player available or the best player in your mind. Each pick, one thing I started when I first got into my first startup draft, what I did was I would only so say I had the 110 and the 2-4, I think the pick is 2-3 or something like that, right? I would only trade the 110 and 2-3 for the, the 108 and the 2-6 or whatever the hell. I'm terrible at that. I can't figure out the numbers, but that's like a really safe way. So you don't lose a whole lot of value, but you also don't gain a whole lot of value, and you're not, shooting yourself in the foot one way or another. So I kind of like it for a first timer.
Yeah. I mean, so when it comes to like trading, especially in the startup, I'd rather a new dynasty player make 0 trades than make one really bad one. Especially if you're in a dynasty league with people who are more experienced than you, you can get taken advantage of a little bit. And so it's really important that people rely on other resources. Like in our Gilded chat, we've got a whole channel set up to help people that are new with dynasty evaluate trades. So make sure that you've got some sort of resource that you're using to kind of help guide you if you're unsure, because making a bad trade like a really bad trade in dynasty can set you back a lot.
Mm-hmm. That's why I think the ones where you're just trading like those two
small moves that aren't very expensive, play it safe while you're kind of learning the trade game.
Yeah. Like they're trades where you're just like, it's 4 spots away from your pick and you're like, oh, I really want this guy to fall to me, but I don't really think he's going to. Let me just give up something small and move up a few picks and get my guy.
Yeah.
I was in preparation for this. I was looking at the first startup I did with just like my friends that we'd played redraft forever. I pulled up the draft board. There was not a single trade made in the startup until the 803. And then once that first trade got made, everyone was like, oh, okay, like we'll do trades now. And then suddenly there was all kinds of stuff. So like,
yeah.
Just starting to do a few trades, like you will start to pick up on like what, just from other people's responses to your trades, honestly, like you'll start to pick up on what, good value is and what bad value is.
Yeah. I mean, the only way that you're going to learn to be a good trader in Dynasty is by getting in there and pulling off some trades. You can read about it and you can use analyzers and you can do all that stuff. But until you go in and you actually start negotiating with your league mates, you're not going to have much success. And so that's another thing that you really need to focus on is that you need to have some sort of working relationship with your league mates, because everybody's going to value people a little bit differently. You like one of the first things that I like to do when I join a new league is I like to find out what trade analyzers people use, because that tells me a lot about how they're going to value players. So just learning your league mates and the players that they like or the teams that they like or what their tendencies are when it comes to the trades that they make. Some people are really tight with their trades and want to stick to really close value. Some people are a little more reckless and just want to get the guys that they want on their team. So learning your league mates is super important to any strategy in Dynasty.
Yeah, definitely. And isn't the case for everybody, but sometimes like if somebody is a fan of a particular team, they might be more inclined to trade for those players. If you're a Steelers fan like myself right now, you probably want nothing to do with any Steelers players. But in some cases, people will, they'll just have affinities towards certain players.
But yeah, it's the players that they're typically watching every week on Sunday anyway, and they're fans of, and so they like having them on their dynasty teams. So a lot of times you can get a little bit of a value bump if you've got AJ Brown for an Eagles guy, or a CeeDee Lamb for a Cowboys guy. Like I want CeeDee Lamb on my teams because I'm repping his jersey every weekend. Like, so I'll pay a little bit more for him sometimes. Learning your league mates is super important no matter what your strategy is.
And if any of our league mates are watching this, don't pay attention to anything we say on Twitter, because that's happened to me. That shot me in the foot a few times.
Well, I've run into some problems in our startup that we're having right now because one of the guys that's in it is somebody that I've been helping a lot with analyzing trades and draft value and that kind of stuff. And he sniped my guys on me twice. So sometimes it can come back and bite you if you're giving out too much information. But we love you guys and we love doing this. So we're going to keep doing it anyway, even if it means at our own detriment. real quick, while we have a second here, I just want to plug our website. It is a great resource for new dynasty managers that need to get some player evals and that kind of stuff. Kind of see where the rankings are. We've got redraft rankings that are going up now. We've got dynasty rankings up there. I think we've even got some IDP rankings for the real addicts of fantasy football. So I just want to go ahead and give you guys a quick show. Are you looking for the latest and greatest in fantasy football insights? Well, look no further than toiletstotitles.com. Our website is your go-to destination for all things fantasy football, offering an endless stream of articles, rankings, and analysis to help you dominate your league. From weekly waiver wire targets to in-depth player profiles, we've got you covered with the insight you need to make informed decisions and stay ahead of the competition. So why wait? Head over to toiletstotitles.com today and take your fantasy game to the next level. All right, guys. So in our last segment here, I know we've kind of been talking about trades here and there, but I kind of want to really focus and dial in on it because it's one of the most important aspects of a dynasty football league, and it's going to be one of the things that a dynasty manager needs to get really good at if they're going to be successful. I know trades happen in redraft leagues all the time, but trades happen on a much larger scale and with much higher frequency in dynasty leagues, and they happen all year long. And their implications are greater because we're keeping these same teams and these same players year after year after year. We don't get a fresh batch when the new season kicks off. So, Mike, what are some things that you would like to tell people on how they should be valuing players differently in a dynasty format as opposed to a redraft?
So the younger, I believe, we kind of mentioned it earlier, the younger players are somehow always going to have more value. CeeDee Lamb, he's a first round dynasty pick. He's probably a first round redraft pick at this point, I would say, right? So, that's kind of a bad example, but
like top 5.
Yeah.
Like 2 overall.
To be fair, the only redraft league I have left is non-PPR. So CeeDee Lamb does not see the first round in that one. But it's kind of hard, especially in your first year. It's going to be really hard to gauge because you don't want to give up too much, even for like a CeeDee Lamb. You don't want to, again, I keep saying it, shooting yourself in the foot. And that's like the biggest thing in Dynasty is to try to avoid doing that and setting yourself back. You might be in a productive struggle, but you don't want to set yourself back like 7-8 years at this point. So the younger guys are always going to have the most value. The high-end wide receivers are going to have, some decent value. If you're rebuilding and you have like Devontae Adams on your team, you could still probably get a first and, a lower tier player for him. So, always pay attention to what the market's telling you and always paying attention to what trades are happening in your league because it gives you an indicator of what they're trying to do as well.
It's also it's important to, I think, and this is also the case in redraft, but just Dynasty, it's easier to make trades because everybody has so many more things to trade, and teams have different goals. Like if your team isn't doing well, you probably want to get rid of some of your productive players so you can have a higher pick in the draft. But being on top of, if somebody has a big week like that, right after that is a better time to sell them than, after somebody has a bad week. Even if you're as much as we, all tell ourselves don't overreact to small sample sizes or anything like that. People, it is in the back of people's head when the last thing they saw was something, not very good or something very good.
Yeah. I would agree with that because, say, for instance, Tua really played well during the whole season, and as soon as the season ended, Tua's trade value plummeted. So that, Dynasty trade values change from week to week to week to week, and even in the offseason, Rashee Rice's value has plummeted
after an astronomical climb.
Yeah, exactly. So you always got to stay on top of these
from the end from the end of the Super Bowl to about 5 weeks ago. Rice's value was skyrocketing.
I think
he got in trouble, and now I've seen him go for a 3rd round rookie pick.
Mm-hmm. I think the only person who's had worse of a value drop, because I don't know if this is true or not, I haven't looked, but apparently he'll keep trade cut. Treylon Burks is the first ever player to have a negative dynasty
No
value.
way.
I don't know if that's true.
don't
That's what
think
somebody
it's
said.
real, but
So again, you got to pay attention to what's going on at all times with these players' values, because one thing could increase or decrease their values within seconds.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, so like, I think a good example would be like Christian Watson. In your redraft leagues, a guy like Christian Watson is not going to be very highly coveted because he hasn't consistently performed. And then, you know, he had some injury stuff last year. There's a lot of targets, but he's young. He's got talent. He's got a good quarterback. He's going to be somebody that is going to be much more valuable in a dynasty format than a redraft one. So
it's funny you bring up Christian Watson, because remember earlier when I said, you know, don't pay attention to our takes on the internet?
Yeah.
Because I said on Twitter, Christian Watson, I would take him for I would trade him for any second, or I would like to trade him for a first, but I don't think I could get it at this point. I would probably take a second. And I sent a Christian Watson to a friend of mine in my home league for a first. He immediately rejected it and sent a screenshot of what I said on Twitter. I was like, son of a...
Yeah, you shot yourself in the foot there.
Yeah.
But I mean, that's what you need to be paying attention to when you're transitioning from redraft to dynasty, is that the values of these players is going to be totally different than what you're used to. And so you need to learn that new value chart, and you need to kind of figure out where people are slotting in. Age, long-term upside, that stuff is going to factor into their value a lot more than what it does in redraft. And then the other thing that you need to get good at is you need to learn how to value draft picks. So like your rookie picks, that can be a difficult thing, and the value of draft picks tends to change drastically based on time of the year. I see that rookie picks spike in value right before the draft as everybody's getting hyped. And then you see them be you see them be moved a lot again around mid-season near the trade deadline. And typically what that is contending teams are shipping their rookie picks to gather some vets to make a playoff push. So those are the two key moments that I see for rookie picks where their values swing the most. Mm-hmm.
One thing kind of to play off of that with the draft, I think this is probably one of the bigger ways that you can get an edge on if you're in a league with like all inexperienced, but like say it's, you know, just your group of friends who played redraft and now you make a dynasty league for the first time. Like if you keep an ear open for what's going around the league, like what teams are trying to do with their rosters, you know what their plans are going into the draft. And say you trying to think of a good example from this past year, but there's a player who you're like, ooh, I think, you know, he's locked in as the starter right now, but they're probably going to add someone at that position in the draft or in free agency as well. Like with Tyjae Spears is a good example of like, they had a new coach come in. They fired Mike Vrabel, and who Vrabel clearly loved Spears. He put him on the field all the time. But then when a new guy comes in, you're like, well, maybe this coach is going to bring in, you know, his own guy, his own free agent, draft someone. And that's exactly what happened. And you see his value go down. So like that might've been a good sell window for Spears when it looked like he was going to be the starter, but they might be bringing in some competition for him.
Yeah. Yeah. You have to be more tuned in. Dynasty leagues are not something you take a break from, you know. Yeah. If you take the off season to ignore your dynasty league, you're going to find that when you come back, when the season starts, you're well behind your teammates who were paying attention throughout the off season.
And the crazy thing too is I'm even looking at players' contracts.
Me too. I look at contracts all the time. I was actually just looking at Josh Jacobs' contract earlier today.
They have an out.
They have an out. Yeah. I mean, this could literally be a 1-year rental. They'd have some dead money, but not enough to where I would say that he's locked in for 2 seasons. I was also looking at Kirk Cousins' contract after the Michael Penix pick. They could totally cut him next year. They'd have a lot of dead money, but it'd be less than what the Broncos had with Russell Wilson, and Atlanta would be able to spread it out over a couple of years, so it wouldn't be crippling. So yeah, that's the kind of stuff that dynasty managers, good ones, are doing this time of year. Whereas redraft guys are, this is their off season; they don't have nothing to do right now. So if that's the kind of stuff that you want to do, then dynasty is definitely for you. If you're not somebody that's going to be keeping up with that kind of stuff, maybe you don't have time, or you just don't care that much. You're going to find that you're probably going to burn out of a dynasty league pretty quick, because the other people in your league are going to be doing all of these things. So
also, I'm glad you mentioned burnout, because while what he says is true, and you want to be on top of things, and you're probably looking to join a dynasty league because you want to be paying attention to things all year, take breaks every once in a while. Take a couple, like, especially after the draft, that's a really busy time. It's okay to take a week or two off and log off Twitter and all that.
Yeah.
But in general, yes, this is all.
Yeah, I mean, you still have some dead times, like after the fantasy playoffs are over, and then when the season's over, you've got a little gap there, and then we typically dive into the rookie evaluations, and that takes us through the draft. And then typically right after the draft, most leagues are doing their rookie drafts. And then you got free agency that's kind of smushed in the middle there. But we're going to end up with, a month before training camp really starts kicking off. And it's going to be kind of slow. Everybody's been dialed into the rookies. Everybody's done their drafts. We did the whole free agency thing. There's going to be some moves that people make right after the draft typically. But then it kind of, it dies down a little bit. You're not going to get a lot of news between now and, training camp. So there are still opportunities where you can just kind of relax and you don't feel like you got to catch every news alert that comes in from Rappaport. One other thing that I wanted to throw out to people are some resources that maybe they haven't been exposed to that can help them specifically with analyzing trades. I mentioned our Gilded earlier. We do have a whole channel set up in there where you can drop your trade thoughts, or if somebody sends you an offer and you're not sure, one of us will hop in there and help you out and kind of give you some guidance on if it's a good deal for you or not, what our insights are to the players that are involved in the trade. I personally like Dynasty League Footballs.com's trade analyzer. I think that one is one of my favorites. I think it values the players fairly well. Some of these trade analyzers aren't very good, and a lot of them are free. DLF is not free. I think it's not expensive. I think it's like $5 a month or something. And they've got a bunch of tools in there that you can use, but I do like their trade analyzer. I think it pretty fairly evaluates trades. I know Sleeper app just integrated Dynasty Nerds trade analyzer. I'm still playing around with it. I think that it overvalues some players, especially the top end guys. But ultimately, that's going to be something that is pretty convenient for most people, because a lot of leagues are on Sleeper, and especially Dynasty leagues, and it's integrated in. So if somebody sends you a trade offer, you can literally just click the Dynasty Nerd buttons on your phone, and it'll analyze that trade for you that's in your inbox. So that's kind of a cool thing that just got rolled out not too long ago. And then obviously Fantasy Pros has all of their rankings, and they've got their My Playbook and Trade Analyzer up there. And I think we all have a level of respect for Fantasy Pros and the stuff that they put out. If you can't or don't want to spend any money on a trade analyzer, you can use Keep Trade Cut. I hate it. I don't think it does a good job of analyzing value. But it is free, and a lot of people do use it. So if you're using it and your league mates are using it, at least you guys are kind of on the same wavelength of what the values are at. I personally take advantage of people that use Keep Trade Cut, because I think it's got some pretty glaring holes in how they value players. But it'll at least give you more information than what you're currently working with if you just have no idea what you're doing.
One thing I'll say about Keep Trade Cut, and I'm probably outing myself here. I don't pay for like any of the trade analyzers or whatever. I'll in a sec I'll mention some of the resources I like, but I actually pretty much every time I'm thinking of a trade or like negotiating trades or whatever, I just type them out into Keep Trade Cut, not because I care what they say at all, but just to visualize it.
Yeah,
that is very helpful for me, and
yeah.
you can like see what is happening. So I do use it for that, but no, and it's also a good way to just like see generally how like people value players. If you don't,
because Keep Trade Cut is crowdsourced basically their information. So every time you go to Keep Trade Cut, it asks you to keep trade or cut 3 players, and that's how they get their values. So it's just every random person that goes onto the website votes every time they go onto the website, and that's how they get their values. So while I don't think their values are very accurate, I also know that a lot of people use the website, and the values are based on that large group of people who use the website. So it can give you an idea of how people are valuing a player, and in a lot of cases you can take advantage of that if you're savvy. So what resources do you like to use, AJ?
So my favorite, there's 2 of them that serve similar purposes that I really like to use, because the trade analyzers are okay, but I think all of them are, like none of them are perfect, obviously. That's impossible. And like I think a lot of people will tend to just plug the trade into one of them and be like, okay, is this good or not? Do I take it? Like the way that I approach it, especially when I'm offering trades, is I will go to one of 2 websites. Dynasty Data Lab is one of them, and I believe Fantasy Calc is the other one. They have databases of real trades that have happened in actual dynasty leagues, like thousands and thousands of them, and you can go and search certain players, filter by league settings, anything like that, and it'll show you a bunch of real trades that happened with the player that you put in. And so like earlier today I was looking at Zamir White, because he's a player I have in a few leagues because I liked him coming out, and that wasn't looking great for a while, and now he's somebody that I'm looking to sell potentially, because he's probably just one of those guys that has like a nice year because he gets a bunch of carries. But anyway, I plug him in, and you can scroll through trades, and some of them you'll see and like they're ridiculous and they would never happen in your league, but you'll see some, he got traded for a second and a third a few different times. You're like, oh, I would take that if somebody offered me that. So maybe and I'm seeing other people made that trade, so let me go offer that to some of my league mates. I think that's a really good. And they also have, rather than like rankings or value or whatever, they'll just have ADP from real leagues, from startups, and that's like really the best way to get a gauge for value, like true value, I think.
Yeah.
Because like a lot, like something like Keep Trade Cut or whatever, they fail to accurately represent how owners of that player specifically feel about them.
Right.
Because like a good example is like George Pickens. I feel like everybody who has George Pickens on their fantasy team is the biggest George Pickens guy in the world.
Yeah.
Like he's a hard guy to trade for, but people who don't have him are not as high on him generally.
Right.
So like when you're looking at real trades that happen, I think that's the best way to figure out what you actually need to pay for a player.
Yeah, the big flaw with Keep Trade Cut is that their values ride the hype train.
Yes.
So if some player is getting hyped up, his value will get massively inflated on Keep Trade Cut, because that's just what everybody's talking about at that moment. The problem is when you go to make that trade, you're either overpaying or you're not going to get a deal done, because when it comes time to do the actual trade negotiation, especially with a good dynasty manager, they're not going to be swayed as much by the hype. So that's the big issue with keep trade cut, but it at least gives you some sort of baseline to work with. What do you think, Mike? What resources do you like to use for your trade analyzing?
So my favorite is actually Dynasty Nerds, but not the one that's on the Sleeper app. I have the Dynasty Nerds app itself. So it's a league analyzer. It's the trade calculator. But for them, it actually takes your team, into perspective. So it's not just like you're plugging it into keep trade cut where every trade essentially isn't in a vacuum, right? You're trading a player A for player B, but that's not taking your team needs into stuff like that. So I do like Dynasty Nerds because it does give you that aspect of it. Like, you can trade it, you can change it from competitive to just a rebuild. So it'll tell you like whose values are going to change here to here, because if you're trying to compete, this is the size you want. If you're trying to rebuild, this is the size you want. So I do like it that way. Keep trade cut is not bad. I kind of agree with what AJ said. It kind of gives you a baseline because the general public is what uses it. You know what I mean? So not everybody like us is degenerates and, try to do all this math in our heads or use, the premium trade calculators. So, it is a good reference to see, who's dropping in value and who's rising in value. Because at one point, Tank Dell and Devontae Smith were on keep trade cut for the same value. And I tried to send Tank Dell for Devontae Smith in every single league, and I got rejected. So it's not always the best, but it does give you a little bit of a baseline.
Yeah.
I think honestly, if you see somebody, because it gives you on keep trade cut the risers and fallers, if you see someone has plummeted in value on keep trade cut, that's maybe someone you want to go trade for.
Right. Find the context behind it. Is there a legitimate reason for that player's value to have tanked, or are people just overreacting to some report that they saw on Twitter? Right. So yeah, like I said, I frequently take advantage of people who heavily rely on keep trade cut. I would never recommend anybody heavily rely on keep trade cut. But it is a good free resource for people who don't want to spend any money, that don't have a lot of trade experience, to at least get some help there. Ultimately, I'm of the opinion that none of these resources should be making your decision for you. You need to be able to evaluate your own team, your own needs, how you feel about the player, how you think they're going to perform both now and in the future. You gotta be able to make those decisions for yourself. You can't just plug it into the calculator, and if it says yes, go for it, and if it says no, don't. You have to think for yourself a little bit. Use it as a tool, but don't rely on it to make your decisions for you. And that goes for any of them. And
like I said, because most of those are just in a vacuum trades. You know what I mean? Like if you have 3 quarterbacks and you're trading one off that has a less value, they might, because if you have it super flex setting, that quarterback's going to be raised up higher. But, you have 3 already and you have a gaping hole at wide receiver, it's not taking into account for your team.
Yep. Hey, and if you guys need any one-on-one insight, you need draft help, you need trade help, you need startup pick help, you want me to sit with you and hold your hand while you do your startup draft and help you out, all you have to do is subscribe to our Patreon and we will be there for you. Are you ready to take over your fantasy leagues and become a champion? Get the edge you need and join the Toilets to Titles Patreon today to get exclusive access to our T2T staff, weekly waiver wire shows, and Patreon exclusive leagues like our signature Frankenstank League. Members enjoy other amazing benefits such as monthly giveaways featuring autographed jerseys, collectibles, Yeti coolers, and more. Sign up now for as little as $9.99 per month and dominate your fantasy leagues like never before. Visit patreon.com/toilets to titles and let us help take your teams to the championship this season. All right, guys. So that's going to pretty much do it for this week's first episode. You guys got any closing thoughts?
You want to go first, AJ?
Sure. I think I kind of mentioned this earlier, but the number one thing that I would add on to what we've been talking about is, for most people, again, especially if you're just joining a dynasty league for the first time, like, it's all for fun. And 2, don't worry too much about and stress too much about oh, is this a good trade? Is this good? Just if go ahead and just get the players you like at a certain point. Like, don't, do anything dumb that's going to run your team into the ground, or don't, still be smart and like take it seriously. But there's nothing wrong with reaching a little bit to take a player that you like, just, like reaching by 6, 12 picks or whatever. It's all for fun. And yeah, that's.
What do you think, Mike? Any closing thoughts?
Yeah, so for me, if you're getting into your first Dynasty League, make sure you're paying attention to your league settings, your scoring, your roster constructions, stuff like that. Because for me, especially in my first one, I had never played in a Superflex league. I had never played in a tight end premium league. I had no idea what a third round reversal was. So you need to make sure you have an idea of what you were doing. Because when I, start the draft and 17 quarterbacks are flying off the board, I'm like, what the hell's happening here? You need to make sure you know what you're getting yourself into. Do some research first. Talk to us. Do what you can, make sure you're ready, because those things can really creep up on you, especially, tight end premiums.
Yeah. For me, I would say the biggest thing I want to put in people's heads is, if you're going to do your very first Dynasty League, you don't have a lot of experience, join a free one. Don't put any money down until you feel a little bit more confident in your abilities. You kind of gotten your feet wet a little bit, and you think that you are able to manage a team and be dedicated to the league for long term. You'll find that free leagues tend to die out after a few years, a lot of them anyway. Paid leagues tend to last a lot longer. But what I don't want is for somebody to go get excited, drop $100 buy-in on a Dynasty League, and then get in there and be completely overwhelmed and regret their decision. So I would say join a couple of free ones first, get the lay of the land, kind of get your feet wet, learn what you're doing a little bit. And then start moving into some money leagues if that's the thing that you want to pursue. All right, guys. Well, I think this was a great first episode. I hope that you guys out there were able to get some good information. Next week, we're going to be talking about when and how to execute a dynasty rebuild. Identifying where your team is at, and then if you figure out this is not going well and it's not going to turn around anytime soon, we're going to talk about how you should approach a rebuild to make sure that you maximize the value that you're going to be getting in return, and kind of shorten that rebuild window as much as you can, because nobody wants to be rebuilding for 5 years. So we'll also dive into some rookie draft strategies and talk a little bit about how it might affect your experience if you're taking over an orphan team instead of joining a startup. So my name is Dylan. You can find me at Wicked_Dynasty on Twitter. We got Mike at Dynasty Dog Mike, and AJ at AJ_FFball. If you haven't already, go drop us a follow. Also, make sure that you check out the at Toilets to Titles Twitter, and you can find all of our Patreon and Gilded information there. We're dropping posts every day with some good analysis for you guys. So if you get to throw us a follow, we would really appreciate it. We will see you guys again next week, and I hope everybody has a great night. See ya.
See you guys.
Have a good one.